Oh, what a mess.
This is Neil Schneider from Meant to Be Seen. Welcome back to my messy basement. We've got a special interview for you today. Dr. John Peddie from John Peddie Research. When it comes to knowing what direction the wind is going in visual computing and processing power and all that wonderful stuff, John is the guy to speak with, and of course he's going to be joining us today. We're going to be talking about augmented reality, virtual reality, all kinds of new devices coming out to market, where things are headed, and of course his new book, Augmented Reality, Where We Will All Live. And we will be back with more right after this. To my immediate left is Dr. John Peddie, CEO of John Peddie Research. Welcome to the program, John.
Hi, Neil. Thank you.
So tell us a little bit, for those who are unfamiliar, what does John Peddie Research do?
Oh, we'll do anything you want. We'll cut your lawn. We'll wash your car. Anything you need, we're there for you.
This isn't a service I've benefited from. I've known you for several years, and had I known, I would have gladly had you cutting my lawn and doing a lot of household chores. You didn't tell me about this, John. Why did you keep it a secret?
Well, because, it's a supply and demand type thing. We can only service so many people, and you are kind of far away.
So, but all the same.
But seriously, yeah.
So if we set aside the lawn cutting work and the landscaping, what else does John Peddie Research do?
We do four things. We provide consulting services. We do market studies and reports. We test equipment, and we participate in and conduct conferences. And it's all rotated or focused around the concept of chasing the pixel. And so that means that we are interested in, try to track, report on, opine on anything that captures a pixel, anything that modifies that pixel, generates a pixel like a GPU does, displays a pixel like a display does, and or influences a pixel as an API does. So we try and embrace all of that ecosphere of about pixels.
All right, good stuff. And we're being a little modest even with that introduction, because you've got a pioneering career behind you. Even pioneer is a title with SIGGRAPH, if I'm not mistaken.
That's correct. I've been doing this a little while. I like to make a joke that I started when pixels were 1 square inch, and now they're very small.
So now, I know with John Peddie Research or with TechWatch, when it comes to graphics processing power and horsepower and where the market's at, JPR is like tops when knowing what direction the wind is blowing. And you've also set up an expertise when it comes to what we'll call immersive technologies, and there's like augmented reality and there's virtual reality, and we're hearing the title mixed reality being thrown around. And let me open up with a question: is what are your thoughts on these concepts of augmented reality and virtual reality being spoken about almost in the same sentence? You see, I see that facial expression. I think you got an opinion there. Go ahead.
It's hard to comment on that without sounding super critical, but the problem is that the virtual reality and augmented reality are dramatically different in almost everything that you can think of, and the only thing that they have in common, and even that's a special case, is that there is a proximity of a display near the user's face. In the case of augmented reality, there may not be a display in the user's face. It could be on the dashboard of his car or airplane, or it could be inside of a helmet. But a virtual reality and an augmented reality have two different goals. Virtual reality is designed to remove you from the real world and put you into another world, an imaginary world. And augmented reality is designed to keep you in the real world with a little bit of additional information that can come from a database or can come from perhaps some imaginary thing such as a game. So they're really, really quite different. And the problem is that people who aren't steeped in the industry and into the technology see the similarity of a head-mounted thing and then draw the conclusion that these are two of the same devices just with different names. So it's a problem with getting the public educated.
Now, I know you have at least some, actually more than average, an interest in virtual reality. However, you're really standing out in the augmented world, if I may say, because you're the author of the book Augmented Reality: Where We Will All Live. Yes. Why are you so excited about augmented reality? Why is this such a big focus for you?
Oh, well, how much time do we have? I could talk about that for days. Basically, it truly is going to change the way we live and how we perceive the world and how we move through the world. And let me just, first of all, give you a little bit of taxonomy. As I mentioned to you, there's 4 or 5 different devices that can be considered augmented reality. There's helmets, which are hard hat shielded helmets that are used by first responders or used by people who are working in the field in, say, dangerous areas who need to have some type of protection over their face as well as a display. Then there are headsets, which we've discussed. There are heads-up display, which are used in vehicles. And sorry, I got a frog in my throat. And then there are projection systems where you look through glasses and a projector is part of the glasses and it creates images in front of you. And then last but not least, and perhaps the most exciting science fiction notion is the idea of having contact lenses that would be a form of augmented reality. Now, all of these devices will bring information to you, to your eyes primarily, and augment how you are perceiving the world. In the case of glasses, you have 2 categories, and that's consumer and commercial. And then you even have 2 more breakdowns, which is indoors and outdoors. So you can have augmented reality commercial headset that's only suitable for indoors, such as a HoloLens, or you could have consumer augmented reality glasses that could be indoors or outdoors that are in the form of prescription glasses. An example there is a company called LaForge that makes that type of device. So thinking about the consumer aspect of it, and keeping in mind that for augmented reality to be successful in the consumer space, the glasses themselves have to be inconspicuous. They can't call attention to themselves as Google Glass did. So people don't want other people staring at them because they're wearing some geeky type of thing. So if you can wear glasses, just as you are wearing glasses now, Neil, that don't scream to the world, "Hey, look at me," then you can move through the world normally and get the benefit of it. Now, when you can do that, you will have the availability of new forms and new realms of information. The very least could be directions on how to get from point A to point B. Others could be, here are some things that might be of interest to you based on how you have behaved in the past. There's a coffee shop down the street, and we know that you like coffee. Or there's a clothing store over here that carries a brand of clothes that you like. Conversely, it can be a real-time translator for you. You could be in a foreign country, look at a street sign, and have it translated to tell you what street you're on. You'd probably still be lost, but at least you'd know what street you were on. And then taking that a step further, because augmented reality systems will have cameras in them, that camera can be running all the time, recording all the time, and so it becomes, in effect, your personal black box, just like aircraft have a black box. And what that does is that changes the game dramatically in a couple of ways. Number one, people, the more people who wear augmented reality glasses, the better. People will behave differently. There will be less antagonism. There will be less hostility. You won't have to be afraid of the police because if the police do stop you or ask to speak to you about something, they will know that everything they're saying and doing is being recorded, just like everything you are saying and doing is being recorded. The police are already wearing what's called body cams, which doesn't give them display data but does record data. And also, if you're going into a strange area, the augmented reality system could alert you and say, look, you're going into a neighborhood that is a little sketchy. Maybe you shouldn't go here. And so your safety factor is improved. So all of that is going to make people feel safer. And when people feel safer, they behave differently. When people aren't afraid of other people, they're not antagonistic to them. They're not belligerent or bigoted towards them. Now, taking it yet one more step further, there is a concept that we could use augmented reality not only to inform us about our environments, but also to modify our environments. And visualize that we were walking down a street and the street had graffiti all over it. And we said, well, I don't like to see graffiti. The augmented reality glasses could remove that graffiti from our view. Or let's say there are trash cans sitting outside and they've been out there too many days. I don't want to see trash cans when I'm walking down the street. So that could be removed from your vision as well. So you have this, amazing possibility of what the world could be like if we all wore augmented reality glasses. It also means that the world will be better policed. And it'll be safer for other people as well. So if you were in a situation and you saw someone being accosted or robbed or bullied or something like that, you would be what's called an honest witness to that. You would see that. It would be recorded. You wouldn't be responsible for being perfectly correct in your remembrance of the color of the shirt of the guy that was being the bully. It would be already recorded.
So go ahead. Finish your thought.
Oh, no, I'm finished. Like I said, I can ramble on about this for days, so you do need to interrupt me.
Well, what I'm hearing are three areas. So first, augmented reality, it enhances the world around us. We see information that we otherwise wouldn't be benefiting from. It sounds like there's a recording benefit. I mean, I don't know. We should talk about whether that's considered augmented reality to record the world around us, but it sounds like it's part of the feature set. And then you mentioned another option, which was to block out parts of the world we don't want to see. Like my basement, for example.
Yeah, your messy basement. There's a complement to that, and by complement I don't mean an accolade, I mean the opposite of, and that is that augmented reality will be very, very similar to what we can currently do with augmented reality, which is to use a smartphone. And so the issue is, the question being asked by other people who are studying this field is, will we be inundated with advertisements? I mentioned to you that the augmented reality could alert me to the fact that there was a coffee shop coming up, and that if I want to have a cup of coffee. But what if I don't like coffee, or I don't like donuts or something, and I keep getting these ads put in my face saying, shop here, go here, visit this place, go to that place. So that's the downside of it, and that's something that's going to have to be mitigated. And that mitigation will be a function of the type of services that you engage with your augmented reality. Just like you can mitigate it on your smartphone as to regard to how many advertisements you get and what type of advertisements you get. So these are a lot of questions that no one has answers for just yet. And so it's a lot of we're trying to make ourselves sensitive to the possibilities and then figure out how to deal with them.
There's the other side of the coin as well, and you're speaking to part of it there, is social interaction. I mean, augmented reality, I think you spoke earlier about enhancing that social environment, unless I'm mistaken. But you meet someone wearing a pair of augmented reality glasses, is the conversation you're going to have going to be an authentic conversation? And what I mean by that is, let's say I meet John Doe. And I say, you know what, I want to get into a conversation with John Doe. And I go, boop, boop, boop. I look up John Doe. I've learned everything about him. And I start talking about things that John Doe is interested in, even though I don't personally have an authentic interest in the space. I mean, that's just an example. No,
it's a valid one. It's a totally valid one, because there is the possibility that we will, in fact, that's the good news and the bad news maybe, that we will engage with people differently, people that we know as well as people that we don't know. But there's a terrific story about a guy who was a pioneer in it's a true story. A guy was a pioneer in augmented reality while he was going to school. He was going to school at MIT, and he was a nerdy kind of guy. And he would go to parties, and people wouldn't engage with him very much, if at all. And he'd just kind of stand around, and he didn't know exactly how to socialize. And he built an augmented reality system with if you can visualize a 486 based computer slung over his shoulder like a letter carrier's bag, and he had a little handheld device that he could scroll the screen, and then he had a eyepiece, so it was pretty obvious that he had this thing on, but he also put a database in of all the people he would meet at a party. So he'd go to the party and he'd say things to them, but he would talk to them about them. And he'd say, well, how you doing, Neil? How are you today? How's your son? I know he had a cold last week, and I hope he's gotten over that. And then, Neil would start talking to him. Well, the expression that the best conversationalist in the world is the person who does the listening. And that's exactly what happened to him, because he was talking to people about themselves and their interests. They liked him, and he became really popular. And there's a sidebar to it. So it came time for him to graduate, and he was making his dissertation presentation, and his presentation was all about this augmented reality thing and how it was going to help people. The professors that were evaluating him for his PhD got into a discussion amongst themselves, left him standing there, and said, "Well, look." He called his device Lizzie, like a Tin Lizzie, right? So the professors are saying, well, if we give Todd a PhD, don't we have to also give Lizzie a PhD? And they were seriously considering this as an important problem. They finally resolved it by the fact that Todd had said that he would always have this device with him. And so they said, okay, then we don't have to give Lizzie a PhD also. So these true stories from the world of augmented reality.
So let's talk a little bit about the business of augmented reality. I mean, you mentioned glasses, head-mounted displays, contact lenses. Is this a short-term thing, or is it 20 years away, 100 years away? Like, what's the reality of augmented reality?
It depends upon which implementation you're referring to. I mean, augmented reality, as I pointed out earlier, you already have an augmented reality device. It's in your pocket, and so you can go out and look for Pokemon. Right? That's an augmented reality experience. And in fact, I'm so thankful for that application, because when I meet people and I talk about augmented reality, I don't have to explain it. I just say Pokemon. They go, oh yeah, I get it. Right? So they understand. But point is that's one implementation. The other implementations I mentioned is a helmet or a headset or a HUD or what have you. So depending on which thing you're talking about determines the time scale. Now, to answer your question specifically, we already have a couple of examples of helmets. There's a company called Dacry that's making one, and two others, whose companies I just can't remember the names, I'm sorry. We already have examples that you can buy of head-mounted displays for commercial applications for indoors. HoloLens is one. Meta is another. We will soon have consumer-based glasses. We already have heads-up displays for our cars and other things. The projection device I mentioned to you is under development by a couple of companies, but I expect we'll see that this year. So the one that leaves open to us is the contact lens. And the contact lens is probably pretty far out. That's probably minimum 5 years out. The problem there is powering the device. Visualize putting a contact lens in your eye. It has to become a projector. It has to project into your retinal nerve. You're not going to be able to see anything. Put your finger up here, you can't see it. So it's got to be a projector. Okay, so we probably can build a thin film projector that would be embedded inside a contact lens. But now we have the problem of how do we power it, and so that's the threshold of the discovery that we have to work on for that. So you have these time scales of all these different implementations to consider.
Really amazing stuff. So now I know it's a completely different market, okay, but virtual reality, it's been around, if memory serves, really since the 60s, and of course, very early form, if you want to call it that. You're begrudgingly agreeing with me. Am I way off?
No, Ivan Sutherland gets credit for developing a virtual reality headset as a laboratory experiment, and that's correct. But virtual reality didn't get any serious traction as a commercial device for use in scientific and engineering until about the 90s. And that's when we started building headsets that were really functional and useful. And NASA and DARPA funded a lot of that work. So I think of, if someone asks me about virtual reality, I say, well, we've been doing, and doing means that there's people paying money for it. We've been doing virtual reality since the 90s, early 90s. At least I have.
Okay, good stuff. So if we look at this modern era of virtual reality, there's obviously been a lot of excitement behind it, a lot of investment behind it, and there were expectations that I would argue went beyond reason in some respects.
Absolutely.
But we have to remember too that VR has been around for a long time and it's got a long history ahead of it. Do you anticipate similar risk factors for augmented reality, and because we're starting to see AR taking a bolder focus now, more so than before, I think. Are we facing a similar risk?
I think AR has already had that bubble pop, and it's the investment in AR hasn't been as staggeringly significant as virtual reality has, but nonetheless, there has been a big name in AR investments, which is Magic Leap company down in Florida, and they got a lot of attention. A lot of people got excited. They got a lot of great stories written about them. The reality of their system is still yet to be seen. What they're trying to do is pretty challenging. I have some friends in the industry who have done consulting work for them, and they tell me that it's just not going to work, at least not going to work to the expectations that the company and investors had. That doesn't mean that they will never succeed or never come out with a product, just means that it's not going to be quite as fabulously presented as some of their demonstrations were, which were basically computer-generated mock-ups. So I think the shine has gone off that rose, if you will, for that particular version. That was also, I should mention, a direction towards consumer augmented reality. And the same problem we have in virtual reality is that the excitement and enthusiasm about the Facebook investment in Oculus was also focused around consumer virtual reality. And people, correctly reasoned that if a consumer gets the product, then you're talking about hundreds of millions of something, whatever it is. And so those types of volumes get people very, very excited. When you're talking about scientific, industrial, engineering type applications for VR or AR, you're talking about, hundreds of thousands. And whereas that's great for the people who are in that business, it doesn't get investors and consumers excited. So it's this trade-off of sensationalism versus reality, the reality of virtual reality. Okay.
But in your opinion, are the market analysts, wetting their pens for augmented reality, similar to what happened with virtual reality, or?
No, I think they've kind of learned their lesson. They've made such fools of themselves on virtual reality that they're being a little more cautious on augmented, and almost all of them are commenting that it's an interesting technology, but it's a technology for the future. And part of their reasoning of that statement is that they look at Apple, for example. Apple's a great consumer electronics company that's done fantastic things, and they're kind of gating their enthusiasm on the progress that Apple is making. And so when Apple comes out with a pair of augmented reality glasses, which pretty obvious they're going to do, then I think you'll see more excitement and more interest, more pundits and investors and so forth, talking more favorably and aggressively towards the augmented reality market. But that's probably 2 years out before you're going to see anything from Apple.
John, we forgot to bring up the most important part of this conversation, which is your new book, Augmented Reality, Where We Will All Live. What can you tell us about the book? What's in it?
What's in it? Pictures, papers, words, charts, diagrams.
Gossip?
It's a brief history. I didn't want to write another history book, but a brief history of how augmented reality got to where it is. It's got very, very long roots. Then I discussed some of the applications, which are so far-ranging. It's staggering. You can't. In fact, you can't write a book with all the applications because they keep coming up. The last one I put in the book, trying not to put in any more, was an augmented reality system for rifles. And with augmented reality, it turns out you can be the best crack shot in the world. And there's a special rifle that's been built with an augmented reality screen on it, and it's just amazing. But the applications are all over industry. Repair, maintenance, surgical assistance, etc. And so then I go on to talk about the technical details of it. Augmented reality is very, very complicated. You have to know exactly where you are in the world. You have to have some type of map capability. It's referred to as SLAM typically, but you have to be able to know that not only where you are in one particular spot, but what the world is like around you as you progress through it. You have to know how your head is positioned, because you're wearing this thing. And so it's got, you now have 6 degrees of motion. That's called pose. And then the apparatus itself has to be very, very accurate. It has to be able to see well. You have to have good hearing. And the hearing has to be the type of hearing that you can wear for a long time. And at the same time, not something that obscures other sounds around you. So it looks like the favorite choice for hearing for augmented reality is going to be what's called bone connection. So it puts a little actuator here on the side of your head so you can hear quite well, but your ears aren't blocked so you can hear your environment as well.
All right. So who do you think your book would be most appropriate for? Professionals, consumers, investors? Like who would get the most out of it?
Well, all the above. I mean, developers, people who are interested in getting into the augmented reality. I was speaking with a company yesterday that is a augmented reality application developer, and the guy was talking to me, and this guy's in the business already, and he heard about the book, and he said, geez, I wish I'd had this book before I started the company. Investors, for sure, because they need to always learn more than they know. People are just curious about it, to see what's coming. Almost anybody that is watching this show, I would say, would be a candidate for it. So it's pretty broad ranged, and it's technical enough, but not so technical it's going to make you fall asleep reading it. At least I hope not.
Oh, and how can people get their book? How can people get the book?
Google. You can go to Google, or you can go to Springer. Springer's a big publisher of books. They published my previous books. So Google is probably the easiest thing. Just Google my name and augmented reality, and it'll pop right up.
Okay, good stuff. So just some quick news items to talk about. I'd really like your opinion. First off, now I know it's not. Well, maybe it is, maybe it isn't directly related to augmented reality, but we are going to see a whole slew of new headsets by companies like Lenovo and Dell and Asus and HP. It's public knowledge. It's in the press. And the big words being used to describe these headsets under Microsoft Holographic is mixed reality. I mean, that's the big catchphrase. But from what I've been reading, at least in the case of Acer, from what I've seen so far, it's not a mix of the real world. It seems to be strictly a virtual reality device for now, unless something changes with how the cameras are used. What does mixed reality mean to you? Is it augmented reality? Is it its own classification? Like, how did mixed reality get into the mix of words?
Oh, there's a researcher, and I'm embarrassed I can't remember his name right now, but a researcher about I think it was in the late 90s, came up with this notion of mixed reality. He had a continuum of a chart, and he had, virtual reality on one end and augmented reality on the other. And then he said in the middle would be mixed reality. and he and his colleague who put this thing together created this chart, which has been replicated in almost every document ever since. In the case of mixed reality, a little side comment here is that Microsoft has projected that name into our vocabulary for their device, but their device is not mixed reality. Their device really is an augmented reality device, a pretty good one, by the way, but it's an augmented reality device. But for reasons known only them, they wanted to create a marketing term, and so they chose mixed reality as their marketing term. And it has, because it's Microsoft doing it, a lot of influence. So people have adopted using that term. I mentioned to you this software development company I was speaking to yesterday. They start out in their presentation talking about mixed reality, and I took the president to task on that. And I said, would you please explain to me why you're using the word mixed reality, or are you just doing it because Microsoft did it? And after a few chuckles and oh shucks, he said, yeah, basically that's it. So what is mixed reality? What does it really mean? And the idea is that it would be some type of merging of a virtual reality situation with the ability to still be aware of, in some way, your immediate environment. And there's pros and cons, and there's two different ways to think about it. One is that if you are totally immersed in a virtual reality world and you want to have mobility, you don't want to be, stepping on the cat or bumping into a wall or, some other hazard wherever you are. So it would be good to have some type of information coming to you that would make you aware of the real world if you were moving around. If you're stationary, sitting in a swivel chair or standing still, then it's not quite as important. So one of the ideas is, well, we'll just put a camera on the front of our virtual reality system and let it look forward, and it'll show us stuff. The problem with that is that unless the stuff that it's showing you is somehow cleverly integrated into the virtual world that you're participating in, then the suspension of disbelief in that virtual world is lost. So it's a I don't want to say good news, bad news. It's a I want it, but I don't want it type thing. And there have been a lot of different experiments put forth where you could have your immediate environment mapped into the virtual world, and the things that are in your immediate environment take on some type of function that would be appropriate to be in the virtual world you're in. But at this point in time, we don't have a identifiable solution or a product that we can point out and say that is mixed reality. We just have experiments.
Okay. So we'll have to wait and see. I mean, it sounds like mixed reality as a definition may be going through changes and adjustments with time. It doesn't sound like it's exactly firmed up just yet.
Yeah, that's correct. And it is sadly in need of a good tight definition, or even it could even be multiple definitions, but we have to come to some agreement on what they are.
All right, good stuff. Now, the last question for you is our last news item. Now, what we've seen to date, and again, we're going to talk about the virtual reality market just a little bit here, is we've seen PC-based virtual reality with products like the Oculus Rift and HTC Vive. We've seen a lot of mobile virtual reality. I mean, we know about, Samsung Gear VR, of course, Daydream VR Viewer, and then you've got a whole lot of mobile, like clamshell add-ons to traditional smartphones. Mm-hmm. And now we're seeing, we've seen some of this before. It just hasn't been as covered in the press as well. But, now we're really starting to see it big in the press is what we call these standalone virtual reality devices, where you've got the device. The new era of devices have what we call positional tracking, which is, it captures every nuance of how you're moving in the VR space. But they're standalone, which means that there's no PC attached and they don't require a separate smartphone, to be added to the device to complete the experience. Mm-hmm. Now, the thing is, the latest data, and I credit this to Road to VR for sharing it, is that they're expecting the devices to be priced at about the same level as the Oculus Rift and HTC Vive. So it's going to be comparable to PC devices. Maybe that will change come launch time, okay? But this is what we know so far. Mm-hmm. What are your thoughts on this new class of device? Is it, does it solve a real problem? Is it a new angle on things that could be very beneficial? Do you have an opinion?
Yeah, I always have an opinion. The devices that I'm aware of that are going to be untethered will be basically very, very similar to a smartphone. They will actually use a chip, an SoC, from a SoC provider who sells to smartphone builders. So it will be very, very similar to Samsung Gear as an example. And what that means is, and that's the idea of the positional stuff that you mentioned, is that the sensors for positioning will be the same type of sensors that are used in smartphones, which, by the way, are the same type of sensors that are used in Oculus and HTC. But the processor itself, the SoC itself, has to be efficient in its power consumption, just as a smartphone does. And this particular processor is. And so part of that efficiency is obtained by reducing some of the graphics performance that you can get, reducing some of the resolution that you can get from your display. And so that is a trade-off that will have to be made between mobility and a tethered experience. So you can get really remarkable high resolution. There's a company called Star VR, which has 2 displays that are better than HD, way better than HD. The resolution and the acuity is just fantastic, but it's tethered. And the problem is that it just takes a lot of power to get that resolution. So I think that the mobility thing is going to be very, very interesting. It's going to be an absolute requirement. People aren't going to really, embrace virtual reality if they've got this, umbilical cord hanging off the back of their neck. It's impractical unless you're willing to sit down, just as you sit down and play a game in front of a PC monitor. If that's the limitation, and you're willing to do that, then the tethered device could be acceptable.
So if we could take a science fiction angle to this, and I'm not privy to any information or anything like that. I'm just a little bit outside the box. Maybe it's really outside the box. We're moving into this VR era where there are wireless head-mounted displays. Like, it's public knowledge, HTC. I mean, there's a countless third-party companies that have 60 gigahertz and 5 gigahertz broadcast signals where you're connecting your PC and that processing power to the headset. I don't know, no clue if these standalone VR HMDs are going to be capable of such a thing, but in the future, do you think there's potential for wireless head-mounted displays that, they have mobile power to get around day to day, but you have that, that switching option to connect to a PC or a platform that has the processing power? Because we really are just talking about, pixels. They're dumb displays with whatever's backing them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Is that a potential future? Personal VR devices that change.
Yeah, I was at a conference not too long ago called Laval VR in France, and there was a company there that has built just such a device as you're describing, and it's a conventional-looking headset. In fact, I'm trying to remember, I think it might have actually been an HTC headset with a 60 gigahertz Wi-Fi interface and a belt-mounted battery pack. And that battery pack will give the user, the wearer, about 4 hours of battery power to drive this wireless headset. And it's cleverly designed too, I might add. That it's got there's a little bit of battery in here in the headset itself, so that if the main battery goes out, you can swap it and not lose anything. There's just enough battery here to keep the thing alive for you whilst you're swapping it. So it could, presumably have even longer lifetime if you have enough batteries with you to run it. Now, the application that these people were targeting was an industrial application where a person had to be out and about, moving out in a factory or something of that nature, or out on the airfield where they're going to be fixing airplanes and they need information. For consumers, I think that's another possibility that could be interesting, but it's going to be expensive and it's going to require a certain amount of compromise to carry all this gear. The headsets themselves are still heavy. And people will get tired of wearing something on their head that has weight to it. So getting the weight down means you have to get everything out of the headset that you possibly can. Also, there's the heat issue. The displays themselves, the backlights, if they're backlit displays, can get quite warm. The electronics in general can get quite warm. And so that's another, let's say, problem for the wearer of this device. But it shows interest. It shows promise. There are applications where virtual reality is like the only solution. And the people who use it are willing to tolerate that because it is the only solution. There's a technology called a cave, C-A-V-E, which is basically a small room where every wall of the room is a rear projected screen. And you go into this room, including the floors and the ceiling in some of these systems. And you go into this room and you can examine things, and you can go in with colleagues and examine things and discuss them. The car companies, for example, use these caves for design review. So do the airplane manufacturers use them for design review. So the next step is to use a virtual reality headset as a kind of portable cave, if you will. And in fact, I've tested some of those as well, and they're pretty good. But the downside of it is the resolution isn't as good, and so you have to compromise on what you can do and what you can manipulate in this world because of the reduced resolution. So there are lots of applications. There's lots of opportunities. There's lots of developments going on. I mean, this is something that's going to be with us for quite some time, and it's going to be like any other technology. It's just going to get better and better and better and better to the point that one day, and I don't know what day that'll be, but one day we won't have this conversation. We won't talk about virtual reality any more than we talk about our PC monitor. When's the last time you had a big, long conversation about your PC monitor? Maybe never, because they're just there. They do the job. Your expectation is satisfied as soon as you plug them in. Virtual reality and augmented reality, and if we ever have it, mixed reality, they'll all get to that level.
All right, good stuff. John, thanks so much for joining us. We have to schedule some time for you to come on over and mow my lawn.
I'll be there this afternoon. Okay.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you for again visiting me in my ever increasingly messy basement. By all means, if you want to be a guest on the program, send an email to neilsmessybasement@mtbs3d.com, and we'll be talking again soon. Thanks for joining us.